Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Martha McCallum, and this is The Untold Story. Today, I'm joined once again by my friend Hugh Hewitt, host of The Hugh Hewitt Show, which is on 6 to 9 a.m. on Salem Radio Network. He's an award-winning broadcaster, attorney, and graduate of Harvard, which we have spoken about in the past. He spent 6 years in the Reagan administration and was also a former editorial assistant to Richard Nixon in his retirement. So beyond being a journalist, he's also a presidential historian. And he joins me this afternoon as there are fires blazing across a huge swath of California about an hour from his home. So Hugh, welcome. Good to have you with us. I know you've been talking and reposting a lot, understandably, about this on social media today. Tell me what your thoughts are on what's happening in California.
Well, I am grateful to be on with you, Martha. I'm grateful that Orange County, where I live and where my studios are and where my law school is not yet impacted. But I spent a lot of time yesterday checking with friends in the Palisades, Bel Air area of LA, offering them a place to stay. Everyone that I know got out. A couple of our Fox friends like Leslie Marshall are waiting to find out how things went with their home, and good luck to them. It's a devastating event. I've lived off and on in California since 1978 when I got out of college and went to work for RN down in San Clemente. I have never seen anything like this, and I've had to evacuate a couple of times over that period of time, so I'm used to fire and fire season. This is not fire season. One of the reasons it's so surprising, it's not really fire season. Fire season usually ends in November with a little bit of moisture in December, but we're dry, we're windy, and we're going to have a all-day Santa Ana wind event. So I'm just hoping that the fires that have started get contained soon and that no new ones start. It's truly horrific. I have not seen anything like this, not the Maui fire, not the Oakland Hills fire in 1991. I know we've had some natural disasters in East Palestine, which is near my hometown in Warren, Ohio. But this is, I think, probably going to grade out at the largest casualty loss, not to mention jobs by the thousands will have been lost along Pacific Coast Highway and into Palisades, Pasadena, and those places.
Well, it's heartbreaking, and we see that it impacts not just these big, beautiful Malibu Beach homes that can be rebuilt, but also large trailer parks that have been eaten up by these flames. And it's horrifying for all of us to watch. It looks like something created for a movie set, but it's the reality for so many people right now in California. And then often comes the discussion about what would help to be preventative to these California wildfires. And I know that President-elect Trump was posting about Governor Newsom and the things that he could have or should have done to protect more water supply runoff from the snow and rain up north that could be really helpful in fighting these fires. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, President-elect Trump is right. He was right when he said it 8 years ago. He was right, I think, when he said it 15 years ago. I have lived here pretty much all the time from 1989 to 2016, and I'm a lawyer. I'm retired now, and I practiced on behalf of land use developers and homeowners, and the restrictions put on fire clearance of coastal sage scrub are absurd in connection with the Endangered Species Act and the Clean Water Act. Moreover, the same debates they were having when I first got here in 1978 about water infrastructure, they've had, and they've done very little. By they, I mean Sacramento legislators. Pete Wilson did his best. Even Jerry Brown in his first governorship tried to get the peripheral canal built. But there is a water shortage problem, which is man-made. Drought is a choice, actually. And we spent billions of dollars of California taxpayer money on a train to nowhere in the middle of nowhere in the Central Valley that could have gone into desalinization plants such as are used in Israel and Saudi Arabia and on board our naval aircraft carriers. We know how to do desalinization, but California stubbornly sticks to living on the edge of crisis, and today crisis came home and it's going to continue. I'd add, whenever people see those pictures of PCH, Pacific Coast Highway, it's all destroyed, all those homes destroyed. There are a lot of people who barely make a living, who make that living working in those shops, tending to those yards, cleaning those houses. And there are also fires in Riverside and other places. It's not just a celebrity event, even though the Palisades may be and Malibu may be the wealthiest part of Los Angeles.
It's a great point. And as we're talking, I'm seeing reports of 100 to 110 mile an hour winds and that these fires are zero contained. So this is an ongoing story and we'll be covering it live throughout the evening at Fox. I do want to ask you, a few other things here, Hugh, that are happening this week. And one to me is the juxtaposition between the coverage that we're doing of Jimmy Carter's funeral and the exit interview that Joe Biden just gave at USA Today, because Americans study our presidents. We reflect on the success or failure of their presidencies for decades after they come and go. And we have one who's about to leave office and one who left decades ago, but left quite a mark in his post-presidency. I'm wondering what you think about the comparison of those two presidencies as we watch this today, Hugh.
Well, I've had an opportunity to interview both men, but when they were at their better. When President Carter was early in his retirement, he would write books that were not anti-Israel. He became progressively more anti-Israel the older he got, and I found that to be unfortunate. His presidency was a disaster. There really is nothing left of it except the Camp David Accords, and most of the credit for that goes to Anwar Sadat and Menachem Begin. Jimmy Carter did preside. The only legislative achievement of the Carter presidency was the Civil Service Reform Act of 1978. When I was in the Reagan administration, I was the acting director of OPM and their general counsel and deputy director. It's a nightmare law. It was a bad law. So Jimmy Carter, nice man most of the time, unless Israel was involved, and then he wasn't very nice. President Biden has spent a career in public service, but he is clearly compromised. He is clearly impaired. I was using the word infirm for a number of years, and I think the greatest journalistic scandal of my lifetime is the cover-up that went up about the president's mental health. I think it is unfortunate that he has decided to give the eulogy at President Carter's funeral tomorrow. We'll see how that goes. Didn't go well at the Medal of Freedom award ceremony. A little bit of anger, a little bit of age showing, and now the president is out on this coast making a flyby. He got to Malibu much quicker than he ever got to East Palestine, Martha. I think that is also going to be a mark on his record. He was very responsive to the people who wrote him checks and not responsive at all to the people of North Carolina in the mountains or East Palestine.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is a record that can be backed up by the time that he spent in those places, the attention that he gave to them during his presidency. When you look at the new Gallup numbers, I think 54% say that his presidency was weak or poor. I forget the exact word for the first category, but basically, not good reviews. How do you think he's going to be ultimately remembered? Because he's working pretty hard right now to correct the record as he sees it and to talk about all of his legislative achievements.
The worst president of post-World War II history. Jimmy Carter held that record for a long time because he didn't understand the Soviet Union. He didn't understand the Ayatollah Khomeini, but he changed in the last year and began the defense buildup. I don't know that President Biden really gets credit or demerits for what has happened. I don't think he's been running the country. And I do believe the impairment is significant. I believe it is a scandal that it's been covered up for so long, and I am awaiting the memoirs that come out. I have to think maybe Ron Klain left after 2 years of being chief of staff because he knew it was not going to end happily because of the president's decline. There's a lot of accountability to be had here. When you compare what Donald Trump did yesterday in his press conference, 90 minutes, freewheeling, Donald Trump, I'll answer anything, I'll talk to you, versus the fact that Susan Page got to sit down with a little bit of video. President Biden is not capable of having a conversation with you, Martha, or having a conversation with me the way that I talked to President Trump for 30 minutes on Monday. He just doesn't have the capacity to do that. And the idea that they were running him, and I say they were running him because I don't really think he's making decisions, that they were going to try and pass him off as a competent president again, that's really scandalous. That ought to be disqualifying for anyone involved in it who is currently serving in the administration. Yeah,
even he, in the Susan Page interview, said that he wasn't sure when asked, do you have the vigor, would you have had the vigor to serve for another 4 years? He said, I'm not sure. And I think that... Go ahead.
Robert Hur told us that, didn't he?
Yes, he did.
The special counsel told us a genial old man with a poor memory, which is a way of saying, I can't prosecute this man, he's not competent. And Robert Hur got savaged. He is owed an apology by everyone who savaged him. And if you remember, right up to the debate night where Donald Trump took him out of the race, we were being told about cheap fakes, and we were being I'm sure you were as well, being scolded by the left in the media for noting that the European trip was a fiasco. It's just obvious he's got to go, and I hope we get through the 13 days without a crisis that actually needs presidential decisions, because he won't be making them.
Well, we had massive inflation and, soaring home prices and lack of, the very short supply of housing in the country. We had the invasion of Israel by Hamas. We had the invasion of Ukraine by Putin, by Russia's leader Putin. All of these things happened on his watch, and yet on his way out the door, he's talking about how he has wisdom of the years and that he has deep relationships with all these foreign leaders, which I'm not sure, Hugh, he should be pushing that line right now, given what a mess the world is in several places.
I'm older than you, Martha, so people will remember, my age will remember the analogy. His 8-track tape is skipping. It used to be, before there was Sirius XM and before there were podcasts, there were 8-track tapes, and you pop them in your car, and after they got worn out, they would skip, and you'd have to throw them away. His 8-track tape is skipping, and it's skipping a lot. And as a result, I think it would be better service to him for him to go quietly into the night, wave goodbye, and go to Delaware and enjoy his retirement, not give many interviews, because the interviews go wrong. You also didn't note the collapse in Afghanistan. I am hopeful that the incoming Congress will take a deeper dive into what actually happened, get us a tick-tock on that, because that was his first decision, and it really set the tone for the 4 years, which have been disaster after disaster. And the American people voted for Donald Trump overwhelmingly because they want to go back to that. They'd rather have some nasty posts on X that they don't particularly like, but competent leadership, than whatever it is we want to call these past 4 years. I call them a failure.
Well, we can obviously spend some time looking back at what happened in Afghanistan with the withdrawal, but I fear that the more pressing action is going to be dealing with the results of it, which is the increase in ISIS activity and the proliferation of the re-strengthening of the Taliban. All of these issues that happen because of it are going to be day of action that the new president's going to have to deal with as he looks at the world stage. So let's transition from the current president to the future president. You pointed out that you had a half-hour discussion with him earlier this week. Then he did a very wide-ranging 90-minute news conference yesterday where he took all kinds of questions, and it was fascinating to watch. So, of course, a lot of the coverage is like, oh, the wacky Trump news conference. He went off on windmills, which is a subject that I've actually reported on quite a bit. I don't think what he said about them was wacky at all. But let's listen to what he said about windmills, and then I want to get your thoughts on where he has been and what he has said this week, Hugh. Go ahead.
We're going to try and have a policy where no windmills are being built. Nobody wants them, and they're very expensive. They don't work without subsidy. When you build these massive towers, and they're 25 stories tall, they're dangerous. You see what's happening up in the Massachusetts area with the whales, where they had 2 whales wash ashore in, I think, a 17-year period, and now they had 14 this season. The windmills are driving the whales crazy.
Your reaction to that, Hugh, and the wider issue of this news conference we watched yesterday?
Well, a few thoughts. One, the windmills are driving the whales crazy is like they're eating the dogs. If you want to draw attention to a subject matter, say something that's memorable, and the former and future president is very good at that. And he's right about windmills. If you live out in Southern California, you drive from the coast to the desert, you go past Windmill Valley. They are enormous. They are rusted. They are not particularly productive and efficient of energy, and they depend upon wind, so they're not reliable either. We need small modular reactors across the country. I think Doug Burgum and Chris Wright, who are going to Interior and Energy respectively, will be very good at that. But I think what Donald Trump has brought back is a recognition that while he's provocative, he's usually provocative with a purpose. he's trying to drive home a point that we need oil and gas. We need a lot of it. He told me on Monday, do you see Biden just banned 650 square miles of what he doesn't even know how big that is, or 650,000, I don't know. But he said, I'll unban it the next day. I don't know if he can or not. Congress certainly can with a Congressional Review Act resolution. But I think the way the president communicates has grown on us in its absence. In other words, we went from Barack Obama's endless press conferences where he would take 5 questions in 2 hours and give monologues, he would filibuster, to Donald Trump talking a lot every day, which was kind of a shock, to Joe Biden not talking to anyone about anything ever. And now we like Trump back. We kind of like to hear from our elected leaders. And Donald Trump is funny. Martha, you've talked to him a lot. He's just a funny guy. Yeah. And he's very, very relaxed in his own skin.
Indeed, he is. And I think that it's refreshing to watch this repartee and to watch a president who, not at all reluctant to answer any question thrown at him. And in the rare situation where it's something that he's not familiar with, he generally will say, well, I don't know about that, but we'll find out more and get back to you. But usually he has, it's something he's given some thought to. He has given quite a bit of thought to Greenland, Hugh. And this is also not a pie in the sky idea. It's something you talked about in the last administration. It's really an issue that deals with Chinese expansion around the world, and where the United States might also flex a bit of muscle in order to have a wider reach and better relationships in more far-flung places. This is the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, reacting to this idea that perhaps Greenland might be open to a relationship with the United States. Watch.
The idea expressed about Greenland is obviously not a good one. But maybe more important, it's obviously one that's not going to happen. So we probably shouldn't waste a lot of time talking about it.
It's interesting because I was reading today, the Prime Minister of Greenland, Muta Eged, says that the shackles of colonialism have prevented them from forming their own alliances. He's talking about about Denmark's rule over Greenland. And it appears that there's some openness in Greenland to thinking about their future differently.
Secretary Blinken never fails to be wrong, Martha. Not only is it not obvious that it's a bad idea, it's a good idea. And not only is it not obvious that it's not going to happen, it might. I'm not saying it will. What I spent some time doing yesterday was talking with former National Security Advisor, Ambassador Robert O'Brien, about Greenland. And he gave me a tutorial on how strategically placed Greenland is, why we need to keep the Chinese far away from their waters and their minerals and their rights. And if the Danes won't step up to protect it by spending at least 5% of their GDP, like Poland is doing on NATO, then we have to step in and protect it from the Chinese ships and indeed the Russian ships. And if we're going to do that, maybe we ought to get a lease for 100 years to be able to use their resources. Or maybe the Greenland people want to have a referendum. They had a referendum in Scotland.
That's right.
On whether or not Scotland was going to stay in the United Kingdom. Why not have a referendum in Greenland on whether they want to stay with the Danes or come to the United States? Because it's not a crazy idea. I just marvel at how wrong. And I think Secretary Blinken's a nice guy. We have very good mutual friends. He's just always wrong. Jake Sullivan has always been wrong because their reaction is whatever is good for America has got to be bad for the world, so we're against it. He did it again yesterday. It's unnecessary.
Yeah. Here's Donald Trump Jr. He made a quick trip to Greenland, and this is the response that he got. Watch.
The Danish media, they tell us, has spent a long time, ever since my father started talking about this in his first administration, creating, very negative views about America. But from what I saw on the ground, and we were there basically the entirety of the daylight there, which is short this time of year, but still amazing, everyone was really into this concept. They loved it, and they love America. They love MAGA. They love Trump.
It was interesting to watch that. What did Robert O'Brien share with you about rare earth minerals and, the potential that Greenland has?
That is exactly the word that he used, oil and gas and rare earth minerals, Martha. And the ambassador has always had his eye on the Arctic, even before he became the National Security Advisor. The incoming National Security Advisor, Michael Waltz, very aware of the Arctic as well. The fact that we do have global climate change has meant new pathways through the Arctic regions. The United States needs to invest in a whole bunch of icebreakers. We might be able to buy them off the shelf from with some amendments to the Jones Act. We spent a long time talking about the fact that Greenland is actually critical to the security of Europe and the security of North America, Canada and the United States, as is Iceland. And we ought not to dismiss whether or not the Danes are doing their job and whether or not we could do it better. Most importantly, all those lefties who are all in favor of the Scottish self-determination vote, let's ask them, should we let Greenland vote on their future? Because they were all in favor of it with Scotland when it was a lefty cause. Now they're against it because it's a righty cause. I just think self-determination is a good idea.
Yeah, it's a great point.
The Untold Story continues right after this.
I was thinking about Greenland when I was working on this earlier, and I thought, I wonder if Trump is going to want Scotland next, because his mother was born in Scotland, and he really likes Scotland. He has some very nice golf courses there. So, and they are itching to become independent from the United Kingdom, which of course King Charles will not want to happen on his watch. That would be a tremendous loss for him, Hugh.
I don't know that we really want Scotland, given the politics of the North right now. They're pretty far out there on the left, and Keir Starmer is a pretty disastrous prime minister. But the whole idea of self-determination for distinct populations is a very good one, and I'm glad the president is bringing that up. I don't know what will happen. I don't think we're going to get the Panama Canal back, but you never know. It certainly doesn't hurt to talk like a superpower. If you talk like a superpower, you act like a superpower. And the only other superpower China notices, and I'm glad that they do.
Well, I remember Ivanka Trump saying that when she was a little girl, her dad always told her, if you're going to be thinking, Ivanka, think big. And I think that's sort of the way he approaches things. And he throws ideas out and says, well, why not? And then it provokes conversation, which is what's happening now. And I think it's an interesting, sort of big approach, and some of it works out, some of it doesn't work out, but it provokes a lot of conversation along the way and gets people thinking differently. I want to turn to politics here at home, and I'm wondering, as we get closer, Hugh, to the Senate hearings for the cabinet positions for the Trump cabinet, what your thoughts are, and whether or not you think that people like Senator Fetterman, for example, may surprise us on some of these and might help some of these nominees to get across the finish line.
Gosh, I think Senator Fetterman might be on his way to becoming a Republican. He's actually been the only Democrat who's been vocally supportive of our one of our closest allies, and certainly the most strategic ally that we have in the Middle East, Israel. John Fetterman has stood strong on the Israelis' attempt to get back their people and to make their country secure. So John Fetterman deserves props for that. He has also noted he's going to work with Dave McCormick and with Donald Trump on whatever he can. That's sort of a Kristen Sinema approach. We saw what it got Sinema in the Democratic Party, which was thrown out. I don't know that they can throw out John Fetterman, but I'm very hopeful that the senator from Pennsylvania becomes more like Jack Reed and Angus King. Those are very responsible Democrats. Senator King is an independent, but he caucuses with the Democrats. Very responsible senators. And I think John Fetterman's votes will show that there's somebody there that the 53 Republicans can work with. And I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful that not every vote has to be done on reconciliation with one big bill or two bills or three bills. But Fetterman would be key to that if that were the case.
Do you think that any of these cabinet nominees are in jeopardy?
I don't. Now, I've heard from some people that Robert Kennedy bothers them, but I also don't think anybody really wants to mix it up with Donald Trump right now. Matt Gaetz did bother me. I said that out loud, but Tulsi Gabbard doesn't. And Robert Kennedy at HHS, I don't really think can do a lot of damage or a lot of good. The agency is such a disastrous conglomeration of 1,000 different things. I just generally think Pete Hegseth will get confirmed. Everyone over at the DOD is going to get confirmed. Bridge Colby going over to be Undersecretary of Defense, very good. China Hawk knows what he's doing. We've got Michael Anton going to state to PPO, very good, smart. Michael Waltz at the White House, smart. These are all people, I love the team, and I think Pete Hegseth is going to do a lot to reverse the recruiting crisis, so I think he's going to get confirmed too.
Yeah, I think he will have a direct line to the rank and file in terms of strengthening their feeling of being heard at the Department of Defense. And I think that that's a huge gap that needs to be filled and fortified that I think he'll probably will be great at. Before we go, I want to ask you your thoughts on the big swing by Mark Zuckerberg, who was very instrumental in trying to get as many votes for Joe Biden as he could in 2020. Then he decided to sit out this election in 2024. Then after Butler, he said it was, the most badass movie he'd ever seen. He couldn't help but be impressed by President Trump, and now making big changes at Meta. What's your take, Hugh?
I'm very happy with the changes. I had Joel Kaplan on the program this morning. He's the head of global affairs now, replacing the Liberal Democrat from Great Britain, Nick Clegg. And Joel Kaplan was the deputy assistant to the president for W. And he's a very smart guy, and he's a very good change for Meta. Mark Zuckerberg has been my guest at the Nixon Library. I've been his guest up in Silicon Valley. I don't agree with him a lot, but I thought his Georgetown speech in 2019 was very good. I actually think his instincts are the American instincts towards free speech. Joel Kaplan explained, I thought, pretty persuasively this morning, they have 95% of their users are outside of the United States. We have the most speech-friendly legal regime on the planet, in the history of the planet, and therefore our regime doesn't always work in other countries. But I think Zuckerberg is doing the right thing by bringing Meta back to its American roots and not sliding towards the European view of top-down statism when it comes to speech. So I welcome the change. I wish they would get rid of the oversight board. I don't like 3 out of 4 members of the oversight board being from countries that do not revere free speech the way that we do. But all in all, a very, very welcome change at Meta. And I don't think it's cynical. I don't think it's a ploy. Yeah. I think it's back to the 2019 Mark Zuckerberg at Georgetown, which I liked a lot.
Yeah, and I think we have to be open to change. We have to allow people to say, well, I learned from a mistake. And, I think there's also an effort among American corporations to understand that their reason for existence is to provide a return for shareholders, to, employ people and to create products. And when they get far away from those things, that's when they get into trouble. And I think if that pendulum is starting to sort of naturally swing back to where it should be, I think that we should be encouraged by that and not sort of cynical, as you say, in terms of pointing at the reasons. It doesn't really matter what the reasons are. What matters is the status of how they approach things.
And did you see, Martha, the story on McDonald's doing away with the DEI approach?
Yes.
It is what you just said. All of America's corporations are waking up to the fact Americans, generally speaking, do not count by race or gender. We think there are two genders. These are 80-20 issues. These are not 50-50 issues. Yep. There are a lot of 50-50 issues out there that divide, but it's 80-20 on gender issues. It's 80-20 on counting by race and counting by gender. So I thought the McDonald's story was little noticed. I'm not surprised you saw it, but also very, very significant.
Yeah, I agree. I think these corporations are figuring out that merit is what matters in employees and that that's what they should look for. And I truly believe that if you hire people genuinely based on merit, you're going to end up with a diverse workplace because there are many smart people of very different backgrounds. So, Hugh, it's always a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you so much for joining me. I know a lot of people are going to tune in when they see that Hugh Hewitt is the person I spoke to this week. And I look forward to seeing you soon.
Thank you, Martha. Always a pleasure to chat with you. Be well.
Thank you to Hugh Hewitt for joining me today on the Untold Story podcast. I'm Martha MacCallum, and we will see you next time. You've been listening to The Untold Story with Martha MacCallum. Don't forget to subscribe on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. Make sure to rate and review. For more podcasts, go to foxnewspodcast.com. Listen ad-free with the Fox News Podcast Plus subscription on Apple Podcasts, and Amazon Prime members can listen to this show ad-free on the Amazon Music app.